There are moments in history where a single day changes everything, where the map redraws itself, where the assumptions that powerful men built their entire strategy on collapse simultaneously, and where the consequences start arriving faster than anyone planned for. Today, March 28, 2026, is one of those days. And what happened this morning at approximately 3 in the morning local time over the skies of southern Israel is not just a military development. It is the signal that the war Donald Trump started on February 28th has just crossed a threshold that no one in Washington publicly predicted, and that the economic, strategic, and human consequences of what is now unfolding are going to reach every American household in ways that are only beginning to be visible. This is the story of how a war that was supposed to be over in days is now being fought on 4 simultaneous fronts, why the president who started it has extended a critical deadline he cannot enforce, and why the country he has been fighting a trade war against for the past year is now watching all of this from a position of strategic strength that no one in Washington adequately accounted for. Stay with us, because this one is moving fast and the full picture has not been assembled anywhere else yet. If you are watching this channel for the first time, right now is the moment to subscribe and hit the bell, because we cover the intersection of geopolitics, trade war, and economic consequences that the mainstream outlets give you in fragments, but never connect into a complete picture. What is happening today in the Middle East connects directly to the USMCA deadline of July 1st, to the fertilizer crisis hitting American farmers right now, to the Canadian potash that American cornfields depend on, and to a trade war that looks more strategically misguided with every passing week. Subscribe, hit the bell. You need to be here for every update between now and July 1st. Let us set the scene for what happened today, because the cinematic detail of it matters. It is 3 in the morning in southern Israel. Air raid sirens erupt across Beersheba, a city of 200,000 people in the Negev desert, sending families into bomb shelters for the 3rd time in a single night. The Iron Dome and David's Sling air defense systems activate. Interceptors launch into the dark sky. And the Israeli Defense Forces confirm what nobody in Washington wanted to see confirmed on this particular morning. A ballistic missile fired from Yemen, more than 2,000 kilometers away, has been intercepted over Israeli territory. Minutes later, a cruise missile launched from Yemen is shot down over the Red Sea. Houthi military spokesman Brigadier General Yahya Sari appears on Al Masirah television and reads a statement in the practiced cadence of a man who has rehearsed this moment. The group has fired a barrage of ballistic missiles targeting sensitive Israeli military sites, he says. The operations will continue until the declared objectives are achieved. With those words, the Iran war that Donald Trump launched on February 28th expanded to a 4th simultaneous front, and the 4 fronts now look like this. Iran, where the U.S. and Israel have been conducting airstrikes for 28 days, where Iran's new supreme leader Mojtaba Khamenei, who replaced his father Ali Khamenei after he was killed on the first day of strikes, has rejected Trump's 15-point peace proposal and issued 5 counter-conditions, including the recognition of Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. Lebanon, where Hezbollah began firing rockets into northern Israel on March 2nd in solidarity with Iran, and where Israel launched a ground operation in the south, with more than 1,189 people killed and over 750,000 displaced since the fighting began, according to the Lebanese Ministry of Health. Iraq, where Iran-backed militias formally integrated into the Iraqi armed forces have attacked American bases repeatedly, where at least 96 people have been killed, and where the Iraqi government has officially summoned the American charge d'affaires to complain about U.S. strikes that killed 7 Iraqi soldiers at the Habaniya military base. And now Yemen, where the Houthis, who had explicitly stayed out of this war at Iran's initial request, reversed course this morning and fired the opening salvo of what their Deputy Information Minister Mohammed Mansour described as a fight being conducted in stages, adding that closing the Bab al-Mandeb Strait is among their options. Let that last sentence register fully. The Bab al-Mandeb Strait, the narrow passage between Yemen and Djibouti at the southern tip of the Red Sea, the waterway through which approximately $1 trillion in annual global trade passes. The second great maritime choke point of this conflict after the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran has already effectively closed for 28 days. 2 choke points, simultaneously threatened, and the man responsible for starting the chain of events that led to this morning is sitting in Washington, having extended a deadline for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz that he cannot enforce, while publicly claiming on Truth Social that talks are going very well. Now let us talk about what 4 simultaneous fronts actually means, because the coverage gives you the individual developments without assembling the strategic picture. 13 American service members have been killed since the war began, according to CNN's tally. 12 were killed before today. At least 10 more were injured in an Iranian attack on Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia this week. The United States, according to its own intelligence sources cited by Reuters, has destroyed approximately 1/3 of Iran's missile arsenal after 28 days of the most intense American air campaign since Iraq in 2003. 1/3 after 4 weeks, which means Iran still has 2/3 of its missile capabilities intact. And Iran has expanded its attacks beyond its own borders to strike Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Bahrain, while simultaneously maintaining the Strait of Hormuz closure that has sent Brent crude above $100 per barrel for the first time in 4 years, peaking at $126 at its highest point. Drop a comment right now and tell me something. On February 28th, when Trump announced major combat operations against Iran and called it the beginning of the end for the Iranian regime, did you think that 28 days later the war would have expanded to Lebanon, Iraq, and now Yemen simultaneously, with Iran still controlling the Strait of Hormuz, with its new supreme leader rejecting the American peace proposal, and with the Houthis now threatening to close a second major global shipping route? Did you think it would look like this? Tell me in the comments right now, because the gap between what was promised and what is actually happening is the most important story in American foreign policy since the Iraq War. And it connects directly to the kitchen table of every American family watching this right now. Here is how it connects to your daily life, because this is not a foreign policy story that stays on the other side of the world. The Strait of Hormuz carries approximately 20% of the world's daily oil supply. That strait has been effectively closed for 28 days. Brent crude started this conflict at roughly $70 per barrel. It has risen to over $100 per barrel and peaked at $126. The U.S. Energy Information Administration confirmed that diesel prices in the American Midwest surged from $3.80 per gallon in late February to $4.80 per gallon by March 9th. The strait also carries approximately 1/3 of the global seaborne fertilizer trade. Urea, the most widely used nitrogen fertilizer, has spiked 30% since the conflict began. 54 American agricultural groups wrote a joint emergency letter to Trump during the spring planting season, demanding he use his presidential authority to protect fertilizer supply chains. The president of the American Farm Bureau Federation described the situation with language that no Farm Bureau president uses lightly. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz sent fuel and fertilizer prices skyrocketing right as planting season began. And now, if the Houthis follow through on their statement this morning and move to close the Bab al-Mandeb as well, every commodity price shock currently hitting American families gets dramatically worse. Shipping reroutes from the Red Sea through the Strait of Hormuz were already one of the world's primary alternative routes. With both waterways threatened, the global supply chain faces a disruption with no modern historical precedent. This is what it means to your grocery bill. This is what it means to the farmer in Iowa who cannot afford to plant his corn because urea costs 30% more than it did 30 days ago. This is what it means to the family in Michigan paying 38% more at the gas pump than they were paying before February 28th. And this is the moment where the trade war against Canada becomes not just economically counterproductive, but strategically incoherent, because Canada produces 32.8% of all the world's potash. Saskatchewan's mines, operated by Nutrien, the largest crop nutrient company on Earth, are the most strategically important agricultural mineral deposits currently accessible to American farmers without crossing a war zone or navigating a closed strait. Canada supplies more than 60% of all crude oil imports into the United States. The Midwest refineries that run on Canadian heavy crude have no realistic short-term substitute. Canada provides roughly 15% of total U.S. electricity needs in certain regions. And Canada has been hitting Trump's tariffs with retaliatory measures specifically calibrated to hurt American farm states at a moment when those farm states are already absorbing the fertilizer shock from the Hormuz closure. There is a man in Ottawa watching all of this unfold who spent his career as a central banker studying exactly what structural dependencies look like when they are put under pressure. Mark Carney knew before he took office that the world was heading toward a period of maximum instability. He said it at Davos in January, standing at the podium of the World Economic Forum before an audience of global business leaders, speaking with the measured precision of someone who has spent 13 years managing the largest economic crises of his generation. "The world is in the middle of a rupture," he said, "not a transition, a rupture. The old order built on American leadership and American reliability is over." The audience gave him a standing ovation. Trump responded by revoking Canada's invitation to his Board of Peace and posting on Truth Social that Canada lives because of the United States. That was January. This is March 28th. And the rupture Carney described is now playing out in real time across 4 simultaneous military fronts, while the Strait of Hormuz stays closed. Fertilizer prices spike into the planting season, and the president who called the war in Iran all but finished after 11 days now cannot explain why 28 days later his own peace proposal has been formally rejected and a 4th front has opened. Picture the scene in Ottawa this morning. Carney's government has already hit NATO's 2% defense spending target, confirmed this week by NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte in Brussels, the highest level of Canadian defense investment since the fall of the Berlin Wall, delivered 5 years ahead of the previous government's schedule. Canada has already recovered $11 billion in trade through 27 new international partners, reducing its exposure to the American market that Trump assumed was its only option. Canada has already redirected more than $660 million per month in oil exports to Asia through the Trans Mountain Pipeline, going from essentially zero Asian oil exports to that number in 18 months. Canada has already signed deals on 4 continents, from China to Indonesia to the Nordic nations to Australia. And now, as the war in the Middle East enters its most dangerous phase, as the Houthis enter the conflict and threaten a second strait, as the fertilizer shock deepens and American farmers write emergency letters to a president consumed by a war he cannot end, Saskatchewan's potash mines are running at full capacity, producing the crop nutrients that the world needs more urgently than at any moment in recent memory. This is the strategic reality that the trade war ignored. When you wage a trade war against the world's largest potash producer while simultaneously starting a conflict that closes the world's primary alternative fertilizer supply route, you do not win leverage over that country. You hand it leverage when you impose tariffs on the heavy crude oil from the country whose oil feeds 73% of your Midwest refineries while simultaneously driving oil prices above $100 per barrel with a war in the Persian Gulf. You do not achieve energy dominance. You create an inflationary shock that your own farm states and your own manufacturing base absorb while paying tariffs on top of it. The Fertilizer Institute said it directly when the Canadian tariffs were announced. Restrictions on cross-border fertilizer trade will drive up costs for farmers, which could ultimately be felt at the grocery store by consumers. That warning was ignored. And now it has arrived, not as a warning, but as reality, compounded by a war that has turned the global commodity market upside down in 28 days. The public opinion numbers on this war are brutal, and they are moving in one direction. An AP-NORC poll conducted this week found that 59% of Americans say the recent U.S. military action against Iran has gone too far. A Pew Research survey found that 59% say the U.S. made the wrong decision in using military force in Iran. 61% disapprove of how Trump is handling the military action. Only 25% say the war is going extremely well or very well. And those numbers were taken before this morning, before the Houthis fired their first missile at Israel, before the 4th front opened, before the Bab al-Mandeb was threatened, before the war entered its 2nd month with no ceasefire, no reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, no acceptance of the American peace proposal, and no clear path to the decisive victory that was promised in the first 48 hours. Here is the sentence from the Houthi Deputy Information Minister this morning that should be on the front page of every newspaper in the United States tomorrow. Closing the Bab al-Mandeb Strait is among our options. Among our options. Not a confirmed action, not a declaration of closure, but a deliberate public on-the-record statement issued on the same morning as their first missile attack on Israel, designed to ensure that every shipping company, every commodity trader, every government tracking the Persian Gulf already spooked by the Hormuz closure now has to price in the possibility of a second simultaneous closure of the world's other great maritime choke point. That is what economic warfare looks like at the state level. You do not have to close the strait. You only have to credibly threaten to close it. And as Al Jazeera's analysts noted this morning, if the Houthis move to shut down the Bab al-Mandeb, along with the Strait of Hormuz, we would have 2 major choke points simultaneously disrupted for global trade. The knock-on effects for every commodity that moves through the Gulf, oil, gas, fertilizer, grain, manufactured goods, would be the most severe supply chain disruption the global economy has seen since the Second World War. And Mark Carney is watching all of this from Ottawa. He has seen this coming. He prepared for it. And the country he runs is now positioned on the right side of every dependency that this war has exposed. Canadian potash is available and not behind a war zone. Canadian oil is flowing through pipelines that bypass every embattled waterway. Canadian defense spending is confirmed and verified by NATO. And Canada's trade diversification means it is no longer entirely dependent on the goodwill of the president who started this war, who is now managing 4 fronts simultaneously with no exit strategy, a rejected peace proposal, an extended deadline he cannot enforce, and approval ratings on the war that are collapsing faster than the Iranian missile arsenals he claims to have dismantled. If this video gave you the complete picture of what happened today and why it matters not just for the Middle East, but for every American who pays for groceries, fills a gas tank, or works in manufacturing or agriculture, share it right now with every person in your life who deserves to understand what is actually happening. Not the fragmented headline, not the single event coverage, the full picture. 4 fronts, 2 threatened straits, a trade war against the world's most strategically positioned neutral country, and a president who called this war nearly finished on day 11, who is now on day 28 with no end in sight. The story is moving at historic speed. We will be right here covering every development. Share this. The truth needs to reach people faster than the next escalation arrives.